Morning. Right, we're just going to start off today's lesson by doing a quick quiz to get you trying to think about what we were looking at before half term and also last term and the term before that. So there's a few questions. I'm going to read out the questions for you and then we will go over the answers. So if you just you can jot down your answers as I go and then we'll check them in a minute. So the first question is name two things that plants compete for. Okay. Next question is two things that animals compete for. Okay, remember the word compete means that they're sort of trying to get to these things. Going back to last term's work, it's like, what is a renewable energy resource? So you just need to give us an example of one of those. What is energy measured in? So what's the unit for energy? And then finally, which part of the cell contains the genetic information which controls the cell? Okay, here are your answers. Just go through those. See things that plants compete for: water, minerals, light, space would be another example. Animals compete for food, water, homes or nesting sites, things like that, and mates. A renewable energy resource is one that can be replaced, for example wind or solar power or hydroelectric power, all of those things that we were looking at last term. Energy is measured in joules, and then the part of a cell containing genetic information is the nucleus. Okay, so in today's lesson we are looking at the practical that hopefully you did on Monday, investigating seed dispersal, and we're going to be thinking about what your results show, analysing them and writing down a conclusion. So if you remember when we were looking at seed dispersal, an example was that sycamore seed, there's a picture of one here, spins as they fall, okay? And by spinning, it means that they fall very slowly to the ground, and it also means that they've got more time to fly away from the parent's tree. In other words, they might be caught up in a gust of wind and they're likely to be taken further away. So in our investigation, I asked you to try and make a model seed and then let it go from a set height and see how far it went, measure the time that it took to hit the ground. And the idea was that you were going to change the weight of the helicopter, the seed that you made, by adding more paper clips or blue tack or various other things, and then seeing whether there was a pattern and seeing what happened to the time that it took to fall. If you didn't manage to do the practical, you can use these results here in this table. When you're going to be using results, you are going to need two columns. You are going to need to use this column here, which is, in this case, is the weight of the helicopter, and that will go along the x-axis here. Okay. And then you are going to use the average time taken to fall. So you're going to ignore the repeats, and you're just going to plot the average time. And that will go along the y-axis here. Okay, so in this case that's the dependent variable, and along the bottom is the independent variable. So this is the thing that you changed and this is the thing that you measured. So what I would like you to do is to attempt to draw a graph of your results, and it could be one of two graphs in this situation, and it really depends on which data you're using. So if you use data on the previous slide where the weight increased went up by 1 each time, then you can use a line graph, okay, which means that your weight will be along this end here, and you can see that it increases by the same step each time, and it will go up. So in your case of the weight of the seeds, it would go 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Okay, and then on the y-axis, in that situation, you would plot the average time that it took. Okay, and then you would have a number of points that you would plot that, and then as you can see here, you would draw a line of best fit. Okay, so that would be how long it took for one when it had 1 paper clip on it. That would be how long it took when it had 2, and that would be how long it took when it had 3. Okay. If, however, you didn't have continuous data, okay, so if the numbers don't go up evenly, so for example, I know some of you, for example, might have used a paper clip for one, and then a hair clip for another, and a lump of plasticine for the third. If it had different, if you changed the weight sort of, but not in an even way, then you would have to draw a bar chart. So in this situation, you would have your categories along the bottom. So for example, you might have, okay, this is where I didn't add anything. This is where I added a paper clip. This one is where I added a hair clip. This is where I added the lump of plasticine, or something like that. And you would draw a bar chart, making sure that you've got gaps between the bars. You remember the rules that we had when we are drawing bar graphs. Okay. Now I realise you might not have graph paper at home, and it's fine to just draw a rough graph in your exercise book, but I'd really like you to just send me a picture of that if you could do that. That would be really great. Upload that on to Show My Homework so I can have a quick look at your graph and make sure that you're okay with drawing those things. Okay, so hopefully you've drawn your graph, which to show what results you got for the practical. And these are some questions that I'd like you to think about and jot down very briefly in your exercise book. You don't need to submit these answers because I'm going to ask you to do the quiz, which involves some of these questions, and so it will be obvious whether or not you know the right answers to these. But this is to get you to think about these things before you actually do the quiz. So question 1. What did we change? What was the independent variable? Question 2. What did we measure to get a result? In other words, and that's the thing that you wrote into the table. So what was it you were measuring as you got the result? That was the dependent variable, because it depended on the other factor that you altered. Question 3, name 2 control variables. So what did you try and keep the same during the practical? So there are a couple of things that you didn't change. So when you were testing, for example, the different weights, there were some things that you kept exactly the same. And you need to think about why it's important to keep those the same. Question 4. What is your conclusion? So what happened as you increased the weight of the seed? Question 5, I want you to think about why it's important that the seed isn't too heavy. So if a seed was being falling from a tree, why was it important that it wasn't too heavy? What would happen if it was too heavy? And then the last question is, why is it important that the seed isn't too light? And that's a little bit tricky. You've got to think about what's in the seed. What is it that the new plant is going to need that's in the seed? Okay, finally, now that you've thought about those questions, I'd like you to complete the Show My Homework quiz to show me that you've understood the various aspects of this practical. The extension task is on the next slide, so if you have time and you want to do the extension task, then move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is your extension task, which thinks about how seeds have evolved so to become the right size. They're not too light, they're not too heavy. So I'd like you to watch this little video, which is all about evolution, and think about and make notes, some notes if you like, about what evolution is and how it happens. And this will lead nicely into the next topic that we are going to be studying in science.